Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Everyday Christian Podcast. I'm your host, Chase Green. This is a podcast where we remind ourselves that God deserves every praise from every creature every day. We're continuing our study of the theme, Fear God and Keep His Commandments. We're looking at Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verses 10 to the end of the chapter this week. I'm going to go ahead and start reading that. Ecclesiastes 5, beginning in verse number 10. He who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver, nor he who loves abundance with increase. This also is vanity. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. So what profit have the owners except to see them with their eyes? The sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eats little or much, but the abundance of the rich will not permit him to sleep. There is a severe evil which I have seen under the sun, riches kept for their owner to his hurt. But those riches perish through misfortune. When he begets a son, there is nothing in his hand. As he came from his mother's womb, naked shall he return, to go as he came, and he shall take nothing from his labor which he may carry away in his hand. And this also is a severe evil, just exactly as he came, so shall he go. And what profit has he who has labored for the wind? All his days he also eats in darkness, and he has much sorrow and sickness and anger. Here is what I have seen. It is good and fitting for one to eat and drink, and to enjoy the good of all his labor in which he toils under the sun all the days of his life, which God gives him, for it is his heritage. As for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, and given him power to eat of it, to receive his heritage, and rejoice in his labor, this is the gift of God. For he will not dwell unduly on the days of his life, because God keeps him busy with the joy of his heart. So this is interesting, to say the least. We're dealing with the folly of wealth to try to bring us happiness. I think this subject gets a lot of people today, if we're being honest. There are many, many people who are living for their money, living for their possessions as well. So this is very, very important for us to think about this week on the podcast. Verse number 10, if we back up, it says, "He who loves silver will not be satisfied with silver." No truer words have ever been spoken, right? This is just totally true. We know this biblically, that one who loves silver, he gets silver, and then, well, it's not enough. I need more, more, more. That's called covetousness. And the Bible is very clear, 1 Timothy 6, verse 10, for instance, that the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. When you think of the word sorrows, does that indicate happiness? It doesn't at all, right? So the love of money is not going to bring us happiness. Have you ever handled some genuine 100% silver or perhaps gold coins or whatnot? How did that make you feel? Was there a draw to them that you had to make sure that you kept in check? And what I mean by that is you look at that silver or that gold, and it's a coin, and it's just really nice looking, and it's shining in, the glint of the light is shining on it, and you handle it and you think, man, I like that. And maybe you say, you know what, I want more of that. Is it not the case that sometimes when we think about gold and silver and gemstones, precious stones, or how about this, even credit cards, debit cards, cash, is it not the case that when we see those things, sometimes if our hearts aren't right, we just want more, 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 and we make idols out of the money, out of the precious metals and gems that can give us money? We need to be careful about that. Most people, I think, struggle with this in varying degrees at some point in our lives. We need to realize, though, that we've got to overcome a struggle to love money. We've got to get rid of that from our hearts. James 5, verses 2 and 3 says, "Your riches are corrupted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver are corroded, and their corrosion will be a witness against you and will eat your flesh like fire. You have heaped up treasure in the last days." That's the wrong kind of treasure, though, right? Jesus tells us we should lay up for ourselves treasures in heaven, where moth and rust do not corrupt and where thieves do not break through and steal. Well, verse number 11 here says, "When goods increase, they increase who eat them. So what profit have the owners except to see them with their eyes?" You just think about growing kids and how much they eat. And while it is the case that sometimes you may find yourself making more money, you find that there's little mouths that are eating so much that you're wondering where the money's going, right? And don't get me started with the price of groceries in the last few years. They have just skyrocketed. And so I think we can easily relate to this when Solomon says, "When goods increase, they increase who eat them. So what profit have the owners except to see them with their eyes?" In other words, what is the point really of trying to increase your goods, materialism, material items, and money, just so you can look at it? And I think we mentioned a week or two ago, Ebenezer Scrooge swimming in piles of gold, right? Okay, what is that really accomplishing for him other than just him covetously swimming in piles of gold, right? So again, there's nothing wrong with making money. There's nothing wrong with making a good living. There's even nothing wrong with having wealth, not just subsistence living financially, but actually being a wealthy person. There's nothing wrong with that. The Bible mentions several wealthy, righteous people. I think Noah's probably an example, Joseph and Abraham and Job and others. So there's no problem inherently with wealth, but the problem lies when we idolize wealth, when we love money and we do anything and everything to try to get money and keep our money, etc., not use our money for good that God would have us to use it for, not be good stewards of our money, etc. Verse number 12, "The sleep of a laboring man is sweet, whether he eats little or much." I think about some of the days back in my high school years when I worked a long day in the hayfield and taking care of animals, horses and cows and chickens and different things like that. And just a lot of really hard work in the sweat and the heat of the day. But I'll tell you this, I slept really well at night. And so I think that is in view here. And then also he says, "But the abundance of the rich will not permit him to sleep." So the rich who is sinfully focused on his riches, again, it's not inherently sinful to be rich, but a rich man who is sinfully focused on his riches, that is, he's willing himself sinfully to riches, he is idolizing his wealth. Is it not the case that he would probably lie awake at night thinking, okay, what can I do to get more? Covetousness is idolatry, Colossians 3, verse 5. So I think that's what Solomon is describing here. Verse number 13 says, "There is a severe evil which I have seen under the sun, riches kept for their owner to his hurt." This is, I think, someone becoming a lonely miser who's just, again, sitting on piles and piles of gold and silver, and all he does is stare at it, and he doesn't use it for good. He's not a good steward of it. Again, I think of Ebenezer Scrooge as a good example of this. I think about King Midas. Do you remember the old story of King Midas and how everything he touched turned to gold? And that was great, it seemed, until he hugged his daughter, and then she turned to gold, and she was no more. She was just a golden object at that point, and then he learned his lesson. I think also about the parable of the talents, Matthew chapter 25. We must be good stewards of things like our time, our abilities, our energy, our relationships, and we also must be good stewards of our money. Part of that, by the way, is making sure that we're giving appropriately and sacrificially, which we probably don't talk about nearly enough, to be honest. The Bible teaches that we must be good givers, cheerful givers. A good and cheerful heart is how we must give. Verse number 14 says, "But those riches perish through misfortune. When he begets a son, there is nothing in his hand." Maybe you're familiar with the old hymn, "Heaven holds all to me. Earth holds no treasures, but perish with using. However precious they be, yet there's a country to which I am going. Heaven holds all to me." But those riches perish through misfortune. Misfortune is translated as travail in the King James Version. The idea behind that is bad business. So essentially, there is one who makes bad business decisions. He loses everything, and that happens quite a bit in the business world. And so then Solomon says, when he begets a son, the one who lost everything through bad business practices, misfortune, travail, when he begets a son, there is nothing in his hand. He has no inheritance to pass down to that son. And so that is vanity from the standpoint of putting one's trust in those physical riches. Verse number 15 says, "As he came from his mother's womb, naked shall he return, to go as he came, and he shall take nothing from his labor, which he may carry away in his hand." Same thing is taught Job 1, verse 21. You can also see Psalm 49, verses 16 and 17, and 1 Timothy 6, verse 7. But as we said already a week or two ago in this series of lessons, you don't see a hearse with a luggage rack, and you don't see a hearse with a U-Haul trailer. In other words, we can't carry our stuff with us when we leave this life. Verse number 16. "And this also is a severe evil. Just exactly as he came, so shall he go. And what profit has he who has labored for the wind?" Is this saying that a man's lot of going from nothing in terms of riches to whatever he gains in life, then back to nothing again, is he saying that that is evil? I think the word evil is not being used as a sinful thing here, like we usually see the word evil described. I think this is the idea of a bad lot. So in other words, somebody who has worked really hard and he's gained wealth, again, nothing sinful about that, and necessarily, unless he's doing it in a sinful way or with a sinful, covetous mindset. So you've got somebody that's worked hard, he's gained some wealth, then he makes a bad business decision and he loses it all. I think the word evil here in verse 16 is saying, hey, this is an evil that happens to many men. This is a bad lot in life that happens to many men. Notice that he says that labored for the wind here in verse number 16. And that is the idea of grasping for the wind, as we've also seen in this study. Basically, pointlessness is the idea. Verse number 17. "All his days he also eats in darkness, and he has much sorrow and sickness and anger." These are various ills that happen to all of us in some form or fashion in life. The problem of evil and pain and suffering is one of the most popular arguments, if perhaps not the most popular argument against God from those who are atheists. How do we answer that? Well, I think that the best way that I have found to answer that is to point to Genesis chapters 1 and 2, the fact that God made everything good. 6 times in those chapters we find the word good in reference to God's creation. The very last time, Genesis 1 verse 31, we find after God made man that it was very good. So God had the best of intentions for his creation, good intentions, because he's a good God. We only find the bad entering into the equation in Genesis chapter 3 when sin entered the world. Pandora's box was opened, if you will, and then, because we serve not only an all-good God, but also a just God, a God that must punish evil, we see consequences for sin taking place, punishments for sin, Genesis 3 and following. Verse number 18. "Here is what I have seen. It is good and fitting for one to eat and drink, and to enjoy the good of all his labor, in which he toils under the sun all the days of his life, which God gives him, for it is his heritage, or it is his lot, it is his portion, we might say. It is fine to enjoy life. Here's one of those points in this study of Ecclesiastes. We want to make sure we're not getting the wrong idea. Again, if we don't focus correctly on the things that Solomon's saying in Ecclesiastes, we might come away with the impression that life is just terrible and pointless in every way, and just the doldrums of life, and sad and depressing even. That's not what Solomon's saying in this book. You've got to go to chapter 12 again, verse 13 and 14. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Here is the point, he might say. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is man's all. This is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. The point being that there is a point to human life, and life is good if we're living our lives in accordance with that point. The main point, the only main point of life, which is to fear God and keep his commandments. We live with that in view, and in practice, as we live our lives, then we're going to have a wonderful life. Even if there are some difficulties that occasionally arise, it's still going to be a wonderful, best, blessed life as Christians fearing God and keeping his commandments. So with that said, verse 18 here, it's fine for us to enjoy life. This really balances out some of the low points, we might say, of Ecclesiastes, where Solomon seems to be despairing for life, wishing he had not been born, etc. Again, we point out that you've got to remember, Solomon is telling us how he felt before he came to realization of fearing God and keeping his commandments. He wants us to learn this much sooner than he did. We need to learn this early in life, not at the end of our lives. So Solomon does realize that there's nothing wrong with enjoying our lives. God wants us to enjoy our lives, but we have to keep the proper perspective in focus. Verse number 19, as for every man to whom God has given riches and wealth, and given him power to eat of it, to receive his heritage or his lot, and rejoice in his labor, this is the gift of God. James 1 verse 17 says, every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, and comes down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow of turning. Those who have wealth in this life, the wealth is a gift of God. Solomon's saying, hey, it's okay to enjoy wealth as long as we're not idolizing our wealth. As long as we're not putting our trust in wealth, we can enjoy wealth. But don't take it too far. Don't put your trust in it, and don't live your life for the purpose of accumulating wealth. Because if you do that, you have not found your true purpose in life. Finally, verse number 20, and this is where we will end for this week. Verse number 20 says, for he will not dwell unduly on the days of his life, because God keeps him busy with the joy of his heart. In other words, he keeps proper perspective on life. He has proper priorities. Matthew 6, verse 33, but seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you. I hope that you, as the listener, as an everyday Christian, will keep the proper perspective on material items, on money, wealth, etc. Make sure that you don't idolize those things. Make sure that you're good stewards of those things. Make sure that you give sacrificially and appropriately a portion of what God has given to you. And most importantly, or all of this is important, but finally, remember to not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth. No, lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Lord willing, next week we will continue with the book of Ecclesiastes, looking at Ecclesiastes chapter 6, and we're going to look at the subject of the vanity of life.